joining us now, Corey Lewandowski. He's in New Hampshire. He'll be in D.C. next week. Just put out an op-ed on Vice President Joe Biden, and I'm just going to read you the first line. It says, and then I'm going to turn this over to Corey because it's a great op-ed. I'm going to put it up today on Trump Nation News. Go to TrumpNationNews.com. It starts out, former Vice President Joe Biden appeared on Good Morning America on ABC TV this week, and anchor George Stephanopoulos asked him a simple question. What did you know about those moves to investigate Michael Flynn, and was anything improper done? That was the first question. The answer, another Biden can't remember what day it is. Joining us now, former campaign manager, Trump 2016, Corey Lewandowski, also the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, Let Trump Be Trump and Trump's Enemies, and he's with us now. Hey, Corey, great to have you, man.
Good morning, John. Great to be back with you.
Tell us about your op-ed, and you were in the campaign. You kind of knew what was going on. It's been widely reported that Joe Biden sat in that meeting with Obama and was part of this decision to basically frame Mike Flynn so he did not become the NSA director. What do you make of this whole thing?
You know, John, this is really political retribution. If you remember, President Trump was going to Washington, D.C. to meet with Barack Obama during the transition. It was the one time where they had sat down in the Oval Office together to have a conversation. During that meeting, it's now been widely reported that Barack Obama told then President-elect Trump, hey, don't let anybody tell you who to hire. Bring your own people in. You have to have people around you that you trust, except Mike Flynn. And it was a very telling story because it was right after the election. And it was very interesting that Barack Obama said that. And the question was, why single out Mike Flynn? Obviously, Mike had been the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it had now been reported that Mike was going to be the National Security Advisor. So for Barack Obama to tell Donald Trump not to hire him really raised a red flag. And what we have seen now is that since that conversation took place, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Samantha Powell, ambassadors, John, from countries like Italy and Turkey, McDonough, the president's chief of staff, all requested, and of course the triumvirate of Comey, Clapper, and Brennan, which goes without even saying, all requested information on Mike Flynn. And this is really a political axe to grind because Obama fired him. He didn't want him in the administration. And, John, it raises some real questions that Joe Biden has refused to answer. Who else from the Trump campaign was spied on and then unmasked? We don't know the answer. No, we know that they had FISA warrants on Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, and Paul Manafort went to jail. But was Governor Chris Christie, who's the chairman of the Transition Committee, was he spied on? Was Jared Kushner, Kellyanne Conway, the staffers in the White House, were they spied on? Was Steve Bannon, Dave Bossie? We don't know because these guys have kept this a secret, and it's now time to unwind this, and it is only because of the work of the acting director of national intelligence, Rick Grinnell, where he told Chairman Schiff that he was going to declassify these transcripts, that we got more information, and that he was going to declassify who asked for Mike Flynn to be unmasked. And these guys are now in the hot seat, and they're, and it couldn't happen to nicer people.
The people that were involved with the unmasking, a lot of people, Corey, don't know what unmasking means. Can you elaborate on that?
So what happens, John, and very candidly, our government listens to people's phone calls, and they listen to phone calls that the phone call in question was a call between General Mike Flynn, a United States citizen, and the former ambassador to Russia, Kislyak, from Russia to the United States. Now, that is a common occurrence when you have an incoming administration and an incoming national security advisor to reach out to their people around the world and saying, hey, we want to talk to you about what the priorities of your respective countries are. Now, everybody on the planet who's in the intelligence community knows that we listen to ambassadors from foreign countries' phone calls. Okay, that's not new news.
Right.
What we also know is that if you're an American citizen and the government wants to listen to your phone calls on domestic soil, they need something called a warrant. Okay, you can't just pick up anybody's phone call and listen to it, even though we have the capability to do it. So what they do is they mask the name, or they hide or redact the name of the individual who is having a phone call with the foreign entity. And there is a process and a protocol through the National Security Agency, which people can ask to have that name unredacted, or in other words, tell me who Ambassador Kislyak was talking to on this particular occasion. And there is a process. And from what we've seen, John, the process was followed. That's not the question. But what we also know is that as soon as that name was unmasked, and we now know the list of, I think it's 39 people who had access to the information, that name was then leaked to the Washington Post. That, my friend, is a felony. Mm-hmm. That, my friend, is you go to jail and do not pass go. You cannot leak classified information, and we now know that it was only one of 39 potential people, including ambassadors. Some names have been redacted because they're still either undercover or are still in sensitive positions. But we know that Joe Biden, just a week before he left being the vice president of the United States, asked specifically for that information. And why is the question? Why did he need to know a week before he was leaving public service who Kislyak was talking to? Why did he need to know that was Mike Flynn?
Well, that's the question. Why?
Because, John, this whole thing and what we've seen, and so your listeners know, the FBI had an investigation that they had begun while Mike Flynn, I believe, was serving on the campaign. Mm-hmm. And if your listeners don't remember this, look, it's in our book, Trump's Enemies. Mm-hmm. Mike Flynn and Chris Christie were the only two people from the campaign who were allowed, in addition to, obviously, then-candidate Trump, to be part of the FBI counterintelligence briefings which were transpiring during the campaign. And the reason for that was they had to have a protocol in place that if Donald Trump won or Hillary Clinton won, the team was briefed up. And then Mr. Trump brought two people with him to those briefings. One was Mike Flynn, one was Chris Christie. So there were three people from our team in those briefings from the FBI and the counterintelligence team to make sure that they were being briefed on any potential conflicts around the world and be ready should President Trump, then candidate Trump, win. That investigation into Mike Flynn was coming to a close. What we now know is Andy McCabe, the fired deputy director of the FBI, after a meeting at the White House, came back and contacted his colleagues at the FBI and said, if you have not closed the Razor investigation, Razor was the code name given to the Mike Flynn investigation, we have additional information. That additional information we know now came directly from the President of the United States because Sally Yates, and I know this is a lot of names. Sally Yates was the acting Attorney General of the United States. She has now testified that she went into the Oval Office for a meeting which was attended by Obama, Clapper, Comey, Brennan, McDonough, and Vice President Biden, where she was then made aware by the president himself, of the unmasking of Michael Flynn's name. So that, my friend, is an unbelievable story. And then she testifies that Barack Obama basically said, look, I don't want to talk anymore about this, so you guys go do it. But what we know, John, unequivocally, is that Comey, Brennan, and Clapper were running the equivalent of a coup d'etat, a takeover of our government to make sure that Donald Trump was never elected. This was literally transpiring as Donald Trump was about to take the oath of office on the Mall after he had been elected president of the United States. And look, in our book, Trump's Enemies, Dave Bossie and I had the privilege to interview Donald Trump, what is almost 2 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And we asked him on page 175, do you think that Barack Obama knew of the insurance policy, and the insurance policy was Michael Flynn? Do you think Barack Obama knew of the insurance policy that Comey and Clapper and Brennan had in place, or do you think he didn't know anything about it? And he said he knew. 2 years ago, President Trump was convinced Barack Obama knew about it. He was 100% right. Sally Yates' testimony under congressional penalty of perjury validated that. And the mainstream media, by and large, has not wanted to discuss it. And particularly, John, CNN has given this no airtime at all.
So Obama has a meeting with Comey, Brennan, Clapper, McCabe. Sally Yates is there. And President Obama informs Sally Yates, who was the acting attorney general at the time, about what this mission was, what they were doing. He informs her. What was the purpose of him doing that in your judgment, Corey?
Well, look, what we're seeing now is that at the very end of their tenures, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, these people, one serving as the acting attorney general, one serving as the UN ambassador, and one and the national security advisor. These three individuals were taking copious notes, John, and what they were doing was something what I like to call CYA. Okay, it's called cover your beep. Okay,
right.
And what they were doing was they were sending emails literally, almost as Donald Trump's hand was on the Bible, saying everything that we did under this administration was legal. Everything we did was in accordance with the rules and protocols in place. What we know, John, what we know and the American people now know, because it's been widely talked about, there were significant FISA abuse applications that we know of for sure. We know for sure that Andy McCabe lied under oath on 3 separate occasions. What he lied about, right, is not just the leaking of information, but other things. Mm-hmm. And he hasn't been prosecuted. So what Samantha was doing, what Yates was doing, what Powell's doing, right, what Susan Rice is doing, is they're covering their tracks. Any information that they would have received, they're saying was completely legal and that they didn't leak any information. And so, look, John, this is cover yourself, because if this comes out, we know we're in deep, deep trouble. And by the way, John, that meeting in the Oval Office took place in January of 2017. We're now in May of 2020. 3 years and almost 5 months later, and we're just finding out that Joe Biden was in that meeting. Joe Biden, look, to his credit, I guess, probably forgot he was in the meeting because he forgets everything. Mm-hmm. So no one's going to question that memory component of it. But I mean, it's unbelievable to know that this is what's happening right now in our government, and that they use the power of the government to spy on Americans, to destroy their lives because they didn't like Donald Trump.
It's clear what their objective was with Michael Flynn, right? They absolutely didn't want, by the way, we're with Corey Lewandowski, his op-ed with Dave Bossie, absolute must read. It's on foxnews.com. Corey, we know the objective with Flynn was to not allow Flynn to be the director of national security, right? Because there were too many bodies in there. He knew where the bodies were buried. He was a former Democrat. He was head of defense intelligence. So it's very clear now to people that this cabal didn't want Flynn in that job because they were afraid of what he knew, right? So that's easy for people to understand. As far as Trump is concerned, when you call it a coup, what was their objective here with the president? How was this going to hinder his ability to govern or take,
John,
take the oath?
Well, look, John, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a tin hat wearing kind of guy who thinks that 3 guys are sitting in a room somewhere and dictating how the world functions. But to sow discord amongst the American public,
right? And
we have now heard multiple stories of Comey talking to then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein about wearing a wire. The invocation of the 26th Amendment, John.
Right.
We don't know if those stories are true or not. What we do know, John, unequivocally, is that while Donald Trump was the president of the United States, Rod Rosenstein, serving as the number 2 person at the Justice Department, not only issued and authorized the Mueller investigation, which we now know from the 53 transcripts which were released by the House of Representatives, not one person said there was ever any indication of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Right.
Okay? We know that for a fact.
Right.
But we also know that Rod Rosenstein signed an additional FISA warrant, which is a foreign surveillance court warrant against American citizens who continue to be part of the Trump orbit, while Donald Trump was the president of the United States. Mm-hmm. Think about that, John. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine Eric Holder or someone else doing that to Barack Obama or his team? I mean, this is, look, again, it goes back to how the deep state is undermining the presidency. And by the way, John, look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there are people who work in the White House as we speak, right, who worked for James Comey for 2 years, right? There are people who worked in the Justice Department who probably were part and parcel to seeing these things happen. And they're still there, right? Look, Bruce Orr is still at the Department of Justice.
Unbelievable.
His wife, Nellie Orr, is the one who started and ultimately handed off the Steele dossier, which now the FBI is saying they can't validate all of it. John, they couldn't validate any of it, but they used it as the predicate for the FISA warrant against Americans.
Gets to, what did Joe Biden know, and when did he know it, and doesn't he have to answer for this? I keep going back to this meeting with Obama. I mean, it's one thing to say there was a bunch of underlings like Rothenstein, second in command, trying to do this, and Obama winked at it. But now we find out that President Barack Obama, 2 weeks before he was leaving office, is sitting in his Oval Office with Comey, Brennan, Clapper, Stephanie Powers, Susan Rice, Sally Yates, and going over how they were going to get Flynn out and undermine the incoming administration. This is like something you would get out of a spy novel. This should never happen.
It's not. It's not, because if Tom Clancy would have written this, they would say that is so far-fetched, it could never happen. There are protocols and processes in place that would never allow this to happen. But the truth is, Brennan, Comey, and Clapper, the triumvirate of the intelligence community, completely failed. Now, I don't know if Russia tried to interfere with the 2016 election, but if they did, it was their job to stop him, to stop them, right? That's what they were getting paid to do. These guys were so stupid, they couldn't even figure it out. And what we know is that the Clinton campaign, after they lost, came up with this whole idea of, hey, let's say that it was the Russians' fault that we lost. So we could go and decredit or uncredit or, call into question the president's success here. And we know for sure that Christopher Steele was on the payroll of the federal government. We know for sure that Bruce Orr's wife took the Steele dossier and handed it to her husband, who then provided it to Andy McCabe, Bruce Orr to Andy McCabe. We know that's unequivocal. We know that Crossfire Hurricane, the program run out of the FBI by Strzok and Page, was done by individuals who had such animosity to the president that they wanted to make sure he lost, and they had an insurance policy to include that. We know that individuals at the FBI who were supposed to oversee this investigation were at Hillary Clinton's election night party. We know all of those things. We now know that there was no predicate for the FISA warrants. We know that they lied on the FISA applications. We now know that that they ruined people's lives, whether it's George Papadopoulos. Hey, they tried to destroy Jerome Corsi. They said, just plead guilty and we'll leave you alone. He said, hey, pound sand. They finally dropped the case against him, right? And this has been time and time and time again, all because they didn't like Donald Trump, okay? That's what this all came down to. And none of these people, not one of them, has been put in handcuffs and hauled off to a federal penitentiary yet. Not one. Not James, I have the Messiah complex, Comey, right? Not Andy, I get fired for lying under oath on 4 separate occasions, McCabe. Not Rod Rosenstein, who signed the FISA warrants while Donald Trump was in office. Not Strzok Page, who we know lied as well. Not James Baker, who's the former general counsel of the FBI, who we know leaked information, which is a felony, to the media. We know that James Comey leaked information to his former law professor. We know that these guys, Comey and Clapper and Brennan, have all at various times lied under oath to Congress with complete impunity, right? No recourse whatsoever. And now we're finding out that Barack Obama and Joe Biden sanctioned it, knew about it, probably authorized it, and we need to know why.
Well, they had a meeting about it. One thing to give a wink, right? And you have reasonable deniability and look the other way, right? That's one thing. But they had a meeting with Biden. I mean, they was sitting vice president of the United States and the president 2 weeks ago. They had a meeting about what they were doing with this, how they were going to undermine and make sure that Michael Flynn did not become national security director, and also in order to undermine the credibility of the Trump administration coming in. And as you say, incoming president, and Rothstein is still signing lying FISA warrants to spy on administration officials or people that could be administration officials. I'm sure they spied on Corey Lewandowski. I'm sure they spied on Dave Bossie. I'm sure they spied on Stephen K. Bannon. You know, Bannon told me a story. He told me the story one night. It was unbelievable, and I couldn't put it together because sometimes, you know, Steve will give you a piece of something. He said to me the day after Trump got elected, November, whatever it was, 2016, right? As exhausted as he was, it was very late the day after. He had 3 hours sleep. He's sitting in his office. He says he gets a call from one of the most high-powered attorneys in Washington. And the guy says, you need to hire me now. And he says, why? Why do I need a lawyer? What are you talking about? And he said, you're all going to jail. They're going to try to put every one of you in jail. You need to meet with me. And I never put the story together because sometimes Steve will give you bits and pieces. But I think that's what he meant, right? Because they were all spied on. Every single one of them.
Hey, look, John, I'll tell you this, and I've been very public about this. $400,000 in legal bills to the Corey Lewandowski family, okay, for me testifying on these fake Russia collusion narrative, witch hunts, Mueller probes, all that crap. 400,000 American dollars, okay? Hey, I grew up in a place called Lowell, Massachusetts. $400 is a lot of money to me, let alone $400,000, okay? Right. So I don't have the personal resources of 9 and 10-digit bank accounts that some people do that, you know, this doesn't bother. It bothers me and my family a lot. Moreover, you know what? You're absolutely right. And, John, look, I hate to say it. I have been critical of the administration from day one. They didn't get rid of these political appointees under the Obama administration. They allowed them to stay and fester, and then they chose wrong people to fill out certain jobs. Look, John, I could go back to it, and I hate to belabor the point because I'll probably get a call from the White House complaining, but I look at people who serve in the government to this day, and the things that they have said about this president, and then they have jobs in the building, and and in various agencies, and I say, how is that possible? They hated you, meaning the president, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, signed letters publicly stating that you were unfit for office. Hey, that guy's over at the State Department now, or hey, that person is over at the whatever location now. I mean, it's mind-numbing to me is the thing, right? And we see it all the time because if we think that these people are trying to advance the president's agenda, we are sorely mistaken.
Well, they're doing the opposite. They're trying to undermine. The question is, you talked about Orr, Nellie Orr. They're still there. 3 years later, they're still there.
That's my point. John, you're making my point. I mean, look, the fact that James Comey got fired is a good thing, and Andy McCabe got fired is a good thing. But Strzok and Page, I think, are still banging around the FBI, I think. I don't know. I don't think they're gone, right?
No, they're still getting paid. They're still there. They're all still there. And then you look at...
unequivocally is still in the Department of Justice. Okay, that's a fact.
They're still making decisions, Corey. And look, we said from the beginning, and you're right, I traced the whole thing back to you, and I'll tell you why, because you knew from the beginning, I thought the biggest mistake the President Trump made was not making you chief of staff on day one, because had you been chief of staff, none of this would have, all these people would be gone. You would have had the proper PPO people in there, White House personnel, all these people would have been vetted. They'd all have been out. You know, I had people telling me when they came in the landing team, that they were going into these agencies, and there were Obama officials that had these jobs in these agencies. They had filled every single one of them. And they said they first went in there, and they had people that had a cubicle without a phone or a computer. They didn't have a phone, but they were on the payroll because OFA, Obama for America, kept them there in case they needed to deploy them to go fight Netanyahu in Israel or go fight a campaign. So they just paid them, and they didn't have a job. Their job was on paper. They showed up every day and sat and played on their iPhone. I mean, this is what happened when our team went in there, and yet we did nothing about it. Half these people are still there, and they're undermining the president. Good people that we tried to put in quit because they said they couldn't get anything done. They were left off emails, ostracized in meetings, given offices in the basement. And how are we gonna get anything done? And still look what Trump did. It's just incredible.
John, just think about this, and I'm going to make a shameless plug for Citizens United and Dave Bossie because he's a friend of mine, okay?
Right.
When he asks the State Department for information under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, which is by law how you can solicit information from the federal government because everything is supposed to be kept in a record, okay? He asked that information. The State Department has summarily just said, no, we're not giving it to you. Dave then goes to a federal judge. Federal judge says, you must provide the information. Period. End of conversation. It's not debatable. This is what the law says. Guess what? Dave writes the request again. They come back and they say, it will take between 45 and 60 years to produce the emails you have requested. Hey, John, I didn't say 45 to 60 days. I didn't say 45 to 60 weeks. I said 45 to 60 years. So if Dave Bossie's grandchildren have an interest in seeing the emails from David Holmes, whose wife, David Holmes, as you remember, is the ambassador or the former special envoy to the Ukraine who listened to both sides of the Trump conversation, even though the phone wasn't on speakerphone. You want access to his emails, right? Even if you say, hey, I want them from this day to this day, and only things that David Holmes wrote, 45 to 60 years. That is the bureaucracy that slows things down. That is the individuals who are the holdovers from previous administrations who say, we're not going to do anything to help you. There's nothing you can do to stop us, right? Because they were smarter and better and more efficient than we were after 8 years of making sure the federal government was loaded with people who were going to do everything they could to stop Donald Trump. And they've done it very, very successfully.
How do we hold Joe Biden accountable for being in this meeting?
Look, John, the thing with Joe Biden and what I like to refer to as Beijing Biden is the American people see this guy on television every single day. Just yesterday, he said, we've lost millions of jobs, millions of lives, millions of jobs, millions. The guy, I can't even follow what the guy is saying most of the time. And so that in and of itself is going to hold Joe accountable. But the other thing is he needs to answer these real questions of what he knew when, because with all due respect to George Stephanopoulos, it wasn't a hard-hitting question that he asked him. Right? It was a very straightforward question that anybody who has been in politics for 50 years should be able to answer. Joe can't answer the questions because he should be very nervous now about the fact that he was in that meeting, has admitted to it, and knew that there was an investigation into Mike Flynn. And look, John, the other thing is they tried to use something called the Logan Act to go after Mike Flynn. Just to give your listeners some context, the Logan Act was passed in 1799. John, I didn't transpose the number there, okay? 1799. And the purpose of the Logan Act, which was, by the way, pre-telephone, clearly pre-computer, was that you had to make sure that individuals who were talking with other countries had registered to do so that they couldn't falsely represent who they were. And you have to remember what we were coming out of. In 1776, we just fought a battle for independence, and we want to make sure that if you were a government official and you were talking to another foreign government, that was disclosed. Okay, those days are gone, John, right? It's over. I mean, nobody has been prosecuted under the Logan Act in 200 years. I mean, it's insanity to think that we're going to go after Mike Flynn, who, by the way, had been named the incoming national security advisor, and he was talking to ambassadors, not just Kislyak, by the way. I am certain during the transition time, Mike Flynn spoke to ambassadors from around the globe, but they didn't try and prosecute him for speaking to the ambassador from Italy to the United States or the UK to the United States, of which I have no direct knowledge but can only assume he had those conversations. It was because we had to make this narrative that the Russians tried to help Donald Trump, which there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
Unbelievable. Corey, we're going to get this out. I want to thank you for your time today. This is really the untold story. Joe Biden's going to have to answer to this, but even further, Clapper, Brennan, McCabe, Comey, Powers, Rice, every single one of these people were in on this. Rothenstein? I mean, it goes deeper. Every time you open a page, it gets deeper. That's why they told Bossie they couldn't get him the FOIA for 60 years. I mean, we don't know what they've done. And
they don't want us to know. John, look, this makes the Kennedy assassination cover-up look like baby talk.
It really does.
Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. And look, that was a terrible tragedy in our nation's history. Yeah. And, the Warren Commission was put together. They put this Mueller Commission together. They put a guy in charge who wasn't truly in charge. Andrew Weissman was running the whole thing. And they could have stopped it from day one because Rod Rosenstein knew from day one that not one person, either from the Obama administration or the Trump team, could say, not even hint, not even intimate, that there was any collusion, cooperation, or coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And we now see that in the congressional testimony. But we also saw that the former Obama administration officials went on TV and they lied. They said, we know that the evidence is there. We know we had to do certain things. Farkas did that on Morning Joe. She went on and she said, oh, no, I've seen the evidence. That's why I had to do these things. Then she gets in front of Congress and says, no, I never saw anything. John, the whole thing was a scam. The whole thing was perpetuated against Donald Trump and our team. And I'm telling you, Michael Flynn was not the only person that they spied on. They spied on other individuals who still work in our government, who are still members of the Trump inner circle, and nobody's been held accountable for it. And if I was a federal judge or if I was Chief Justice John Roberts, I would want to know why the FBI lied to the FISA court and nobody has been brought forth for lying on those applications yet.
I would think that one of those FISA court judges has to really be pissed off that they got lied to and ended up signing documents that were falsified. 302s were falsified. It gets deeper by the hour. Thank the Lord for Richard Grenell getting in that position to start getting to the bottom of this, because they were just hoping the clock ran out, right? I mean, that's why they're tanking.
What the hell did these other people do? John, what the hell did these other DNIs do for 3 years?
Right.
Grenell's been there for 70 days, and he came to the bottom of this thing. Look,
right.
Mike Flynn is an American hero who put 33 years in uniform and was a 3-star general.
Right.
I hope that he has the greatest lawsuit against these people that you've ever seen, because I believe his civil rights were violated. Okay,
right.
I truly believe that. And if that is the case, then he is going to be a very, very, very wealthy guy.
His civil rights were violated. Your civil rights were violated. I have no doubt, like you said when you came on, anybody that was in that campaign was spied on. There's no question about it. They were spying on it with tax dollars, breaking the law in order to undermine the campaign to ensure that he didn't win. And then when he did win, panic mode set in, and then they had to take him out. And now I could even tie COVID, the tyrannic response, to tanking the economy now. Now they have to get him out. They have to run the clock out on this economic shutdown, so make people dependent on the government to get him out, because then they'll all take charge and the investigation will be over. If Trump wins again, what are they going to do? Because he's going to get to the bottom of all of this, all of it, if he wins again, right?
Look, John, I sure hope so. And obviously, as a senior advisor to the campaign, I'm doing everything possible to make sure that Donald Trump is reelected. But it's not just about the election. It's about what the next 4 years brings. And it's about holding people accountable, because no one's above the law. It's about making sure that this never happens again, John, to anybody, not to a Republican, not to a Democrat. Can you imagine just for 1 second, if George W. Bush had been spying on Barack Obama or his team?
Oh, my God.
Can you imagine if he was spying on David Plouffe or the other people associated with the campaign, the Obama campaign? It would be the biggest scandal in 100 years or 1,000 years in the history of our country, and it would be, those people would all be in jail. Look, Scooter Libby, who was the vice president's chief of staff, ended up being a convicted felon for leaking information which was secret, which was the name of an undercover FBI agent. Come to find out, CIA agent. Come to find out, he didn't even do it. Dick Armistead did it, okay? Mm-hmm. But Scooter got blamed for that. It cost him 10 years of his career and tens, if not more, at least millions, if not, tens of millions of dollars to get his reputation back. These guys of the Obama team, knowingly leaked information, knowingly leaked the Mike Flynn unmasking information to the Washington Post. Not one person's been prosecuted. Not one. Bill, hey, I hope U.S. Attorney Durham, and I've never met the man, never spoken to the man. I have a lot of confidence in him. I hope that he comes out, and he comes out soon, and he shows exactly what transpired. Because remember, when Andy McCabe was given a criminal referral for lying under oath, the Department of Justice decided to drop the case.
You can't even get your arms around it. This thing, the doors are getting blown off it. The fake news refuses to cover it. It's not going away. Biden is going to end up being the worst nightmare because they're going to have to cover it now because he was in that meeting, which he now can't remember that he was in the meeting. Maybe his memory's bad, but 8 people were in this meeting. 8. I mean, when you got it would be
John,
one thing if it was. Yeah, that we know of. I mean, it would be one thing if it was just Biden and Obama, and he could say, well, I don't remember. But the problem they've got is Sally Yates, who didn't want to go to jail for perjury, who told the truth about this meeting. That's the problem they have. That broke the dam. This whole thing is going to bust out, and they can't do a darn thing about it, and handcuffs are coming out.
Well, they had better. Hey, you know what, John? I'll tell you. And look, I'll probably get banged on this one, too. I'll probably get in trouble for this one. You get 8 people in a meeting that no one knows about for 3.5 years. You know, unlike the Trump administration, you put 3 people in the Oval Office on the front page of the Washington Post in 15 seconds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, look, it aggravates guys like me and you and those people who want to see this president be successful, who continues to be surrounded by people at the NSC who leak information, whether it's his conversations with, you know, the former Prime Minister of Australia or others, right?
Right.
And that's what has happened since day one. Unprecedented leaks coming out of the White House, this White House, partially, John, because the people who were brought in or held over didn't support the president.
Right.
Some of them still don't, and they have not fixed that problem yet. Hey, I do think, to be fair, the Office of Presidential Personnel is now run by a new individual who is 1,000% a Trump guy, and he is trying to fix those issues. But we still have people in very senior levels of the government who should not be there, who have decision rights to prevent people from going places. And that has to change. If Donald Trump is going to have the success that he deserves, particularly in the second term, let's actually staff the government the right way.
Well, so far we haven't done it because we're still getting leaks. There was one just the other day. There was a major leak the other day. So it's still going on in there. And you're right. It doesn't matter what meeting he has and who's there. Somebody immediately runs the Washington Post or the New York Times or Maggie Haberman or The Hill. They run immediately, and they're still leaking stuff. But the point that you just made, 8 or 9 senior people in a meeting with Obama 3.5 years later, that didn't get leaked. And it still wouldn't be out had Grinnell not taken over on a temporary basis. And look what he's done in 70 days. It still would be under wraps. And what they were attempting to do is keep this under until they can get rid of Trump, get Biden in there, and then it would all go away because then they're in control of the levers of government again, and this whole thing could get covered up, and then it would be over. But now, if Trump wins again and they've been exposed, now they've got nowhere to go with this. I mean, the fake news can only hide this, Corey, for so many days and weeks. They can only do it for so much time. And, you know, we got COVID-19, we got the economic shutdown. People are not focused on it. But what you said today should put the fear of God into every American to understand what is going on in our government. It's unbelievable.
John, if they can destroy a man's life, who's a 3-star general, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the national security advisor to the President of the United States, and their notes, which clearly the Department of Justice had from the FBI agents who in their own handwritten notes said, do we want to get Mike Flynn to lie to us so we can get him fired or prosecuted? Right? That was their goal going into it. If they could do that, not just to anybody, but to the sitting national security advisor, and not just in a coffee shop somewhere, inside the White House, That should scare the hell out of every American. That should scare every single person. Say, they can do it to that guy, they can do it to me. And look, John, the naysayers are going to say, but Michael Flynn lied. The truth is, those FBI agents on their 302s, which they're supposed to write within 48 hours, the 302 is their contemporaneous notes of the meeting. They're supposed to write those up within 48 hours and hand them in so that your conversations are fresh. They did not write for 7 weeks until that. And then they edited them. And in their own original 302s, which the president asked to be disclosed today, they said Michael Flynn did not lie. So that's the truth. The FBI agents who went into the White House, who broke protocol, didn't contact the White House counsel's office at the direction of James Comey, just went in there. And look, again, Messiah Comey, right? This guy who's going to determine what's right or wrong says, hey, it was a new administration, and I didn't think I had to call. It wasn't that there wasn't a White House counsel sitting there. Of course it was. Don McGahn was there from day one. James Comey just didn't care. He just said, hey, we're going to send a couple FBI guys over there. And they told Mike Flynn you didn't need an attorney. They now saying that Mike Flynn didn't lie. And so these people who said, well, Mike Flynn lied to the FBI, and that's why he was prosecuted. No. That's not what happened. That's not what happened. And if these FBI agents could do that to Mike Flynn inside the White House, just think of what their power is to everybody else. And that's why I'm with Rand Paul when we have to make sure we are keeping our government in check and making sure they are not abusing the powers that they have, which is right now spying on Americans in many cases without a court order, and then unmasking those names and providing those names to the media for their own political gain. That is the most outrageous, egregious, disgusting thing that we could possibly imagine happening to a free country.
Scary times. Corey Lewandowski, I want to thank you for your time. You can't even really fathom the depths of this. I mean, you really can't even fathom it and how deep this went. And this meeting in Obama's office, I mean, because up to this time it was okay. We had, McCabe, and there was an insurance policy, and Peter Strzok, and Lisa Page, and it was rogue people, and nobody trusted Rothenstein. Now it's going up to the president of the United States. Now it's going to the vice president. Now it's going to every senior official was in on this. Every single one of them. Stephanie Powers. I mean, the ambassador to the UN was in on it. And then they just leaked it in order to destroy lives so they wouldn't be in a position of power, because if they were, they would be able to find out what they're finding out now. And if Trump hadn't made Grinnell the head of NSA, if Bolton was still there, I'm not a fan of Bolton, as you know, but if Bolton was still there, you wouldn't have anything. None of this would have come out. So
look,
it's
Rick Grinnell has done the American people a service. And remember, when Rick Grinnell threatened to declassify the House intelligence transcripts, Adam Schiff fought him every step of the way, because when it came to Corey Lewandowski's testimony, Adam Schiff leaked all of those parts of it that he thought were the most, detrimental to me. But he did not want the American people to read the Yates and all of the other Democrats' testimony, who to a person, Comey, Clapper, Brennan, everybody who ended up in front of that committee, whoever they were, all said to a person, we saw no evidence of Russia collusion with the Trump campaign. Schiff's entire narrative for 2 years completely fell apart. He knew it. He went on TV, lied to the American people, and those transcripts that Grinnell forced out proved it.
Corey Lewandowski, thank you. Thank you for your time and for sharing that with us. And thank you for your op-ed. And we're going to get this out for all the world to see. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.